don't ever walk out of the pharmacy when you get that refill without opening the bottle and making sure if it looks different, ask. Not that I'm suspecting a mistake has happened. Pharmacists can say, oh yeah, manufacturer X and last month you had Y, but it's the same stuff.
Yeah, that's huge.
And it's a good double check.
Huge what you said. I had no knowledge of that. Hey, I'm Greg Grunberg, and welcome to Talk About It, the podcast where we focus on topics that everybody should be talking about, and hopefully they will be, but not only talking, screaming about.
Epilepsy shouldn't keep you from doing anything that you want to do.
Talk about it. Talk about it. Talk about it.
This season, we are going to continue to talk about living with epilepsy like my son and millions of Americans do. We're also going to look at other related health conditions and causes. Our goal is to knock down, drag out, eliminate stigma, and raise awareness. Oh, and hopefully have a laugh or two along the way. Each of our episodes will feature amazing advocates and champions. We will learn together how to make a real difference in our own lives and in the lives of our communities.
Talking about it is important. It's all about connecting.
Talk about it.
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 Talk about it. Thank you for talking about it.
Thank you for talking about it.
New season, new sponsor. Thank you, Neurelis, and everyone at Neurelis for sponsoring Talk About It. Talk About It is also sponsored by Seizures Are Signs. SeizuresAreSigns.com is dedicated to educating those living with or caring for someone with uncontrolled seizures about the importance of early diagnosis, recognition, and treatment. Seizures Are Signs is made available by Jazz Pharmaceuticals. All right, let's jump right into this episode of Talk About It. Welcome to this episode of Talk About It. It's really important to have a dialogue with your provider. You and your doctor should be able to discuss anything. You should be comfortable to talk about anything. Keep a journal. Tell them what your triggers are. Remember all this stuff. Write it down. Bring it to the appointment. Guess who else you need to have an incredible relationship with? Believe it or not, maybe not as intimate, not as personal because you don't have that much time with them, but your pharmacist. And we have one of the heroes in the epilepsy community, Barry Gidal, who is going to discuss that and so much more on this episode. Very important episode of Talk About It. Barry Gidal, I have to say, you're like a big hug. Every time I see you, I love seeing you. You're so knowledgeable. You're such a pillar in our community, in the epilepsy community, for so many reasons. But I thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And I had to bring Ken along because he's such a fan as well. And wanted to make sure we didn't miss anything. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, like I said, I'm really flattered I'm here. You're like the biggest epilepsy advocate I've ever known. You're like an actual hero.
Oh, stop. Well, yeah, I play one on TV. If it's not scripted.
I had to throw that in.
Yeah, thank you. If it's not scripted, I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm just reading off the script. But let's just talk about you because you really are a hero. And give me the elevator version of how you got involved in the epilepsy community, your career. Like, just take me through how this all evolved to where you are today.
Sure. Well, when I went back after I got, my initial degree in pharmacy, I went back to graduate school and training at University of Washington. I was really fortunate to sort of by accident, really, start working with a professor who was doing work on epilepsy, both animal research as well as human research. And I hadn't really ever given it a serious thought before. And the more I got into working with the patients and the more I got into working in the science, I learned that I really loved it. And this was where I saw I could make a huge difference, especially as an academic pharmacist, one who does practice as well as research.
And
it's incredibly rewarding.
Yeah. What in particular did you see? Was there a particular need? Was it an emerging field like at that time?
Well, so dating myself a little bit, right? So this is in like the late 1980s. We only had about 4 different anti-seizure medicines back in those days, and they all had bad side effects, and they all caused drug interactions, and we were just beginning to develop these new drugs.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out these new medicines that are being developed. How do they fit in? How can we make them better? How can we work with our patients? So yeah, when I saw that, and then when you hit on that magic combination, right, of drugs, you could really change somebody's life. And we don't get to do that a lot, with in other areas. So
no, that's really true. And also at that time, I would imagine, so you're privy to things that we're not privy to as caregivers. And, you hear about things that are coming, that are in the pipeline. It seems like with technology, it's been so much more aggressive compared to like the 70s, the 60s, the 80s, where it was just, you had to wait a lot. What is the difference? Why are the drugs coming faster and why are they better now?
So I think the real answer is back in the day, getting back in the 80s and 90s, we still didn't understand a lot of the genetics. We didn't understand a lot of the, what is actually going wrong, in the brain and how to target these medicines. A lot of them we were kind of discovered by accident, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so now as we learn more of the science, we learn the genetics, we can actually are starting to be able to target drugs, develop them and target them to specific defects. I mean, that really is, personalized medicine, precision medicine. So I think as we learn more and as the science tells us, we can develop new treatments. Now, not every new drug that's going to come out is going to work for every single patient, but I think that explains it. We can generate new molecules based on what we think is going wrong.
And from the patient's perspective and the caregiver especially, it is so important. I'm sure you're going to just, support this, but the communication with your pharmacist, with your provider, it's so important because we now through social media and also the connections that we make through podcasts like this. I mean, we don't mention specific medications here because I'm not a doctor and, but people ask all the time, like, what's Jake on? What, I hear that he's doing well. I'm like, yeah, he's doing well, but it's different for everybody, right? So it can be kind of dangerous when somebody hears of something, although they're not going to be able to get the med themselves. They have to go through their provider. But what do you tell people when they because Google can be a good thing and it can also be crazy, right? It sends you down a rabbit hole and you think that this, the CBD, you go to the store and get that. We had to, like, Jake got on something that's FDA approved and all of that. Do you hear from people all the time? They're like, "What? I heard this plant is working." And this and that. What do you tell people?
Yeah, well, so that gets back to when you asked me what fascinates me about epilepsy. We can take, two patients, two people, and maybe they even kind of look like Jake and somebody else, same kind of seizures, but maybe completely different biology that's going on to cause it. So where one drug might work in Jake, it's not going to work in the person that looks like him that's got the same kind of seizures. Now that's kind of the mystery of it all. So the problem is, I think sometimes patients read this, since we're talking about, cannabis, cannabinoids, that they can look at it and they say, oh, gee, it ought to work in everybody. I wish that it did. I wish all these medicines, it was like a magic bullet, like some blood pressure medicines can work in darn near everybody.
Yeah.
It can't. And the only way we know that is sometimes people get frustrated. You probably did as a parent, right? A lot of times it seems like trial and error.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's not really trial and error. It's just like we have to keep pitching, until we get that right ball in there that's gonna work. So it's a lot of it is education.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you asked about talk about it, I love your show, the title.
Thank you.
People have got to ask. They've got to be willing to have that conversation both ways.
Yeah, and that
Us
is
with them.
Yeah, the communication. So I think it's new for people to hear that the communication with their pharmacist is just as important as the communication with their epileptologist or their neurologist. Speak to that. It's important to have a good relationship.
Yeah, well, I think we're also in the era where people sort of pharmacy shop. They go around looking for the least expensive, and I get that, right? I'm on a lot of medicines too; they're expensive.
Yeah,
but the problem is then if there's a lot of different providers involved, nobody knows exactly the whole story. And there's a lot of these drugs can cause drug interactions, especially with the non-seizure medicines somebody may be taking, and unless that provider knows everything. So even if you're using several different pharmacists, tell them what other medicines you're on. Tell them the over-the-counter stuff, the herbal stuff, if you're buying CBD or something somewhere, because there can be drug interactions. And that's probably the number one thing.
Yeah.
Because we can avoid a lot of problems if people just know what everybody is taking.
Right. And we're learning all the time. I mean, I had a reaction to a drug that some guy put me on. No,
some guy gave you.
No. My doctor put me on, and it was working. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, what is going on? I had a rash, whatever. So it's you never know. And like Jake's on multiple meds. And so you're right. Certain things interact with others, and certain medications, I think, you can correct me, but it seems like if you're taking one med and then you add an additional med, it might even help that first med work even better. So you have to
Yeah.
be careful as to how much you can use of each, right?
Yeah, well, that's kind of what my area of research is, trying to look out, because we always think of drug interactions as being bad guys. Sometimes they can be really beneficial.
Right.
And that's with the stuff that I do, is trying to figure out that combination. But yeah, getting back to the communication, the other thing where I think, pharmacists can be super helpful and for patients, these drugs, this, with your own son and yourself and all of us, they can be hard to take if you're taking lots of different stuff throughout the day. There are sometimes, things we can do of switching products up with different formulations that make it easier, or, helping people work out a system that works for them, of when to take things. Because if you don't take the medicine, it's not going to work, right?
Right. What do you, this is an area of frustration, and I think you probably know where I'm going, but it's the generics. And
Okay.
And Jake's been on meds, and he's been on a med, and then all of a sudden we go to pick it up, and it's the generic, and they've just decided to switch, or we have to get the letter of approval, and it has to be there has to be a necessity, and it's hard enough for a caregiver to stay on top of that, but for a patient who's using epilepsy medication, it's really, really tough. People that are frustrated out there with this exact thing, what would you say to them?
So a couple things, just, because again, some of the work that I've done research in the past with other folks, some of them I think have been on your podcast over the years, I think generic anti-seizure medicines are fine. I think, but the problem is when we start going between the different products, going between different generic formulations individually, they're fine.
Mm-hmm.
They're equivalent to the brand. But it's when you start going from the generic to generic, I think it can be difficult. So my suggestion, what I try to tell, and this is what we tell patients is, again, talk to the pharmacist and say, hey, listen, I'm taking drug X. It's a generic. If at all possible, can I get the same manufacturer time and time again? And sometimes that can be difficult, right? Because the big pharmacies, the big chains, they have national buying contracts, but individual pharmacists are usually willing to work with you, and they'll understand it. The other thing is, I tell people, don't ever walk out of the pharmacy when you get that refill without opening the bottle and making sure if it looks different.
Yeah.
Ask. Not that I'm suspecting a mistake has happened, but I think it gives people reassurance. The pharmacist can say, oh yeah, manufacturer X, and last month you had Y, but it's the same stuff. And I think just knowing that is comforting to people.
Yeah, that's huge.
And it's a good double check.
What you just said is incredibly valuable and not something that I have ever thought about. And I can't believe I'm saying that after all these years, is that a different company might be making that generic. You might switch to a different company, and that might, that might change how it's going to work for you. So that moment when they say, do you have any questions for the pharmacist? When you pick up your meds, even though there's a line in back of you.
Yeah. And if it looks different, again, ask the question. Say, hey, not that I'm questioning you, but I just want to, tell me about this, and it's a different brand. But it opens up the dialogue and the conversation.
Coming up on Talk About It.
Or maybe take older drugs. It's called repurposing, taking older medicines that had nothing to do with epilepsy, right? But all of a sudden we're finding it may be beneficial in some of these rare diseases. So yeah, it's super exciting.
Are you confused with medications, generics, and name brand and all that? I lose my mind. How they expect anybody with a condition to follow this, I will never understand. So you know what I did? We could have reached out and gotten another doctor to help explain. No. Producer Nick Marzak is here. He's done the research. He Googled it.
Okay, I think I got it. I am not a doctor. I don't even play one on TV. Maybe Greg can help with that. So the FDA approves a generic drug if it is bioequivalent to the brand name drug. This means under their rules that there is no significant difference in the rate and extent that the active ingredients perform in your body when given at the same dose under the same circumstances. There's a window of tolerance though. It's not a one-to-one match. So the generic drug can be up to 25% higher in concentration than the brand name drug, or 20% lower, and still be considered considered bioequivalent. So if you are used to taking a generic drug that is 80% the concentration of the brand name drug, and then the pharmacy switches manufacturers, switches generics to one that is 125% the concentration, that can obviously lead to side effects. Your body will handle that concentration differently. The other thing to note is that bioequivalence only pertains to the active ingredients in the drug. So all of the inactive ingredients like the coating, the flavorings, the filler that adds the bulk, the disintegrants that control how the drug dissolves, all of that could be completely different from generic to generic medication. So your body could react to those ingredients differently. It's so important to look at that medication and make sure that it looks the same. And if it doesn't, journal. Journal when you take it, how you react, so that you can talk to your doctor about its effects. This will all help to maximize the effectiveness of your treatment. And if you're still not sure, you want validation of this information, talk to a real doctor or pharmacist, not me.
Again, I want to tell you, I think generics are fine. I think our rules for establishing those are really pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
But what I do also say is, I'm sure, Jake, you kept a seizure diary, right?
Yeah.
For Jake, yeah. And I encourage every patient to have a seizure diary. If you do switch, this month you get a different company, and all of a sudden you start feeling different. Maybe it's side effects you never felt before, or maybe there's something. And that month, write down what the name of the manufacturer, name of the pill was, the lot number, all these things you can get from the pharmacist. And then you bring it back to your doctor. If something all of a sudden seizure counts go up, or, you got side effects, or maybe you stop feeling a certain way.
Right. Right.
This is all just another piece of the puzzle. But again, you can't know that until you have the conversation. And so, yes, when they say any questions for the pharmacist, say, yeah, actually I do.
Yeah. And what you're saying, what I think I'm hearing is that the pharmacist can use that knowledge, and they can then, will they jot it down? Will they remember and say, this batch might not be as effective as, or is that what you're saying? Or is it?
Well, no, I'm saying, to have that knowledge ahead of time, put it in your seizure diary. But yeah, most pharmacies, they can go back and they can trace what they actually physically dispensed. So if there is a problem, this is how things, on the rare occasion where there is a problem, how it can happen. But honestly, Greg, I think the bigger thing is people are afraid of these switching between medicines. And I think that adds the stress.
Yeah.
It adds stress for patients. It adds stress for caregivers. And, all these things can add up. And sometimes that can lead to a bad outcome.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there, because we've had majority of it has been good with generics, but there have been those moments. But when you have to deal with your physician sending in a letter and getting the approval, that's an insurance issue. But so talk to me about the pipeline, what you're excited about, without getting specific. Should we continue to have the hope that we have? Because it seems to me, everybody I talk to, wherever I go, people are very excited about the future and how technology and everything, we're fine-tuning a lot of these rare forms of epilepsy.
Oh yeah, I agree with you. You should be enthusiastic. Again, as we learn more about the biology, the neurobiology, companies are doing a couple different things. One is we take some older drugs that worked really well for a lot of people, but they cause bad side effects, maybe visual side effects or other things. And very clever medicinal chemists are able to reconfigure that molecule and get rid of some of those side effects. So that's great, because now we can take good drugs and maybe offer them to even more people, or maybe people who had problems before. But I think we're discovering, as we start looking at, again, some of the rare epilepsies, that what are some of the underlying causes, again, able now to create these newer drugs that can actually target, or maybe take older drugs. It's called repurposing, taking older medicines that had nothing to do with epilepsy, right? But all of a sudden we're finding it may be beneficial in some of these rare diseases. So yeah, it's super exciting. And I think the pipeline is going to keep going.
I just want to say that, Barry, one of the things that comes up a lot is how people talk about it amongst themselves, and how they can stay on their regiment, their treatment regimen and how they can rely on each other to help do that, especially within the family. You mentioned a seizure diary, a super important one way to potentially stay on top of it. But what are other ways that you could recommend, perhaps smartphones or other things, where people can stay on top of their treatment regimen? What do you recommend to folks?
So I think if you're a younger person, a lot of the smartphone technologies can work really well at keeping track on things. Some of my, I don't like saying elderly. I now refer to them as a chronologically gifted patient that's a little bit older.
I love that. That's
Yeah,
good.
some of the cell phone technologies may not work quite as well. I still find, for me, a good old fashioned pill box. That's what I use.
Yeah.
That works. But also in staying on top of regimens. Too many patients, when I see them, they'll come into my clinic, and on the occasion when I try to get their partner, to come in as well, the partner doesn't really know what medicines patient's taking, and this has got to be a team effort, right? It's everybody's got to kind of be involved.
Yep.
And part of it, again, the talk about it part, Greg, to again plug the title of your podcast, your show here, is I can't figure out if I've got a patient that I feel is not taking their medicines routinely. There's no one size fits all answer. I've got to have the conversation of tell me how you take your medicine. Tell me about how you organize your day or your evening. And you got to individualize it, because just telling people, you got to remember to take your medicines. Yeah, that doesn't work.
Right. I'm doing a series called the Caregiver Call Center series, where I'm like taking calls and then an expert gives advice. And it was interesting what you just said, because it is a team. Going in, there's independence, right? So Jake goes to his own appointments now, and he'll go in, and then we'll follow up with the doctor, because they'll have questions maybe, because it's also a social thing. It's like you come in, I see somebody, I'm like, hey, what's going on? And there are so many things that you don't necessarily won't write down as a patient, and then you might not remember everything. So to go with somebody who is a partner, a friend, a spouse, a parent, that's really important. That you're not going in alone. So it's not, the onus is not all on you.
Well, the other thing I tell patients before they come into clinic, and I tell friends this too, have other medical conditions, is plan your doctor's appointment, plan your visit. You've got maybe 10 minutes, right? 15. I don't know how long they give you with Jake, but write out the questions that you have, or write out new concerns, or this happened to me, a couple of months ago, and I'm not sure. If you don't write it down, because people get pressured, they get harried, they're in there, and then they walk out going, ugh, I wish I'd have remembered, to ask. But if you have it written out, so plan your visit.
That's plan before, and then take those steps, and also keep a journal, keep a record of seizures, when they happened, what may have triggered those seizures there. It's so important, because all that information is so valuable to everybody on your team to get you under control. What's the best advice in life or in our community, that you have ever received? The best advice.
Never say no right off the bat to anything, right? And I tell students, like freshmen in college, when they do these little orientation things, we started this off asking me about, why epilepsy. I never dreamed I would be getting an epilepsy when I went to my graduate training, but I kept an open mind.
Yeah.
It's like, one of my college professors had said, never say no, because you don't know what you don't know. And so keeping an open mind, and don't close doors, and you'd be surprised where that can lead you. Look, I'm here talking with you.
Exactly. Yeah, but I'm the lucky one here, not you.
Yeah.
And again, I said this before, but like every time I go to an event, every time I'm speaking somewhere and I see you, it's like a magnet. The two of us are like, hey, what's going on?
Yeah,
it's just
hug.
great.
It's a hug.
And we have to remember, and we talk about Jake, we talk about whatever, but it's just nice to have friends in the community. It is like a family. We had Tony Coelho on. He talks about family and how the community, there's nothing wrong with. And it goes to what you just said, saying, don't say no right away. When somebody says, there's a group of us we're meeting, or you should really talk to this person, or, come to the walk, or whatever, give yourself a yes first. Don't look for reasons why not to do it, because we have such a wonderful community, and it's I learn from everybody that I talk to all the time. You and I have spoken so many times, and I just learned about that the company thing. So it's like when you talk about it, things will come up, and a little bit of information might really help you down the road.
Coming up on Talk About It.
There's so many people who think they're going to offend their doctor by asking for a second opinion. It's no.
Right. It is a team, and everybody wants the same thing.
No seizures, no side effects. And that should be our goal.
If you know my career, you know that I never say no. A la Big Ass Spider, a la Satanic Hispanics, a movie that producer Nick is also in called Max Reload and the Nether Blasters, and my son Jake, who I talk about all the time. Jake's in the movie. Look, just be open-minded. Don't say no right away because you're closing off opportunities. And yeah, you want to be safe. There are situations that you might have an opportunity to go into and you're like, oh, I shouldn't really do that. Because maybe there's a way of doing it in a way that is safe. So don't let anything stop you from at least thinking about opportunities. Don't say no. Don't let your epilepsy or anything stop you from at least pursuing opportunities. And say yes.
When you talk about the chronologically challenged, which is a great
No,
phrase.
chronologically gifted.
Oh, gifted, chronologically gifted. I'm the challenged one, the chronologically gifted one. Yeah, when they're dealing with their medicines, what is unique for those folks when it comes to AEDs, anti-epilepsy drugs, and people who are chronologically gifted? Are there things that they have to consider differently than those who are younger?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Ken. As there's a few layers of this, so you'll have to indulge me here. First is as we get older, we don't handle the medicines, get rid of them, metabolize them, the way we did when we were young people, right? And so sometimes doses need to be changed. And what I see it happens a lot is somebody, especially if they've been seizure free for a long time, they were put on a dose of a drug and then kind of left there for years. And then all of a sudden they start not feeling well and they start getting side effects or something happens. It's because dose may need to be adjusted. I think the other thing that happens, if we're lucky enough to continue aging, we start accumulating other medicines, and all of a sudden now we can get drug interactions that we wouldn't have predicted 10 years earlier, 5 years earlier, 3 years earlier. So it's a constant review process. That's why I'm saying that people who go between different doctors and different pharmacies, the whole team may not know the whole story, and that's the problem. And that's where a pharmacist, I think, can really help. Even if you're not getting your prescriptions filled, let somebody on the team know everything else that's going on. And I think those are the biggest challenges.
I think that's a really good point. And you may have already partially answered this, but I do encounter people that have been on the same medication for 20 years, and there's so many new. And they're living with a certain side effect, and they're like, "Well, that's okay because I know that my seizures are relatively under control." What do you say to somebody who's just so stuck in their ways? I mean, I hear it all the time. They'll name a medication, and I'm like, "That's like really old. Like, don't they just give horses that now?" Like, I mean, I'm joking, but you know what I mean. Like, it's just an old med.
I think the thing that's sad about this is that I believe the mantra, and Ken knows this from the Epilepsy Foundation days, right? Our goal, no seizures, no side effects. And that should be our goal. It may not be achievable in everybody, but it should be our goal, right? And I think a lot of people have learned just to sort of live with it. Well, it's not perfect, but I'm only having a few seizures. Or, I only feel bad. I get dizzy or double vision for a couple hours in the morning. But, I can deal with that. Well, maybe not. Maybe there's better things. Like you just said, there's newer drugs out there. We maybe can tinker with the doses. But, a lot of times patients won't tell us these things. And if we don't know, we can't act on it. So again, it's don't be complacent. I guess that's my message.
Don't
Well, and
settle.
a lot of times patients are only seeing general neurologists, and there's sometimes they need to think, let's go to an epileptologist, let's go to a second opinion.
Yeah, for sure.
There's so many people who think they're going to offend their doctor by asking for a second opinion. It's no.
Right. Right. People need, I say this over and over again, people need to understand that it is a team and everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants you to do the best you can possibly do to gain control and to be, like you said, no seizures, no side effects, as close as we can get to that. And if you're experiencing it, don't be afraid to get a second opinion or have a conversation with your doctor.
Right.
That's the other thing is you go into a doctor and you just want that magic bullet. You just want to say, okay, this is what it is. It's not that simple. And we've experienced that. Let me ask you something about double vision. Is there any, because Jake gets this and
does he?
And it frustrates him and he's on 5 different meds. He takes a combination of meds in the morning and meds at night. Is there any one trigger that you've heard over and over again that might cause it? Is it a lack of sleep in combination with a certain medication or,
No, some of the medicines, especially if they get absorbed really quickly, they sometimes does his double vision last all day long, or is it just after he takes something?
Yeah, it's usually after he takes something, and then if he lays down, takes a nap or something, then he'll wake up and he'll be fine.
Yeah. Well, again, without getting into Jake's, regimen and not giving advice, but depending on the medicine, sometimes some of these drugs, if you take a little bit of food, it kind of slows that down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I tell, people, if there's a certain medicine that, makes them really drowsy and maybe they get a little bit double vision, depending on the medicine, of course, right? Maybe taking that toward bedtime, that you can sort of mitigate some of those things. But again, it really depends on the, on the strategy. Now, Greg, has he talked about it with his neurologist?
Yes. And we've talked about it and we've been honing it, but what you're saying makes sense to me because I think maybe the mornings that he has had that, it's been where he had rushed breakfast and he didn't have enough breakfast. He didn't have enough food in him. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, that's good to know. I mean, again, I'm learning. You're not going to bill me for this, so I might as well use this time as much as I possibly can.
Oh, I already sent the invoice. Exactly. I told you that at the get-go.
Ken will let you know. It'll bounce. The check's going to bounce. So it doesn't matter. Yeah, it's not going to work. What is the best advice that we always end every episode pretty much with this, the best advice that you can give somebody out there who is just being diagnosed, or their child or their spouse or their friend, and they're fearful and they're like, I don't want the label. I don't want to deal with it. Yeah. Like, what can you tell people?
So one thing, what I suggest to people that are newly diagnosed is, take a breath, absorb, what the information you've been told. But in virtually every state somewhere near you, there's an epilepsy foundation chapter where there are support groups. This is, as you well know, right? This is a scary thing. You've just been given this diagnosis and you feel like you're all alone.
Yeah.
And you feel like you can't talk to anybody. And I have never seen a patient who ended up sometimes I have to really talk them into it, of going in and connecting with the Epilepsy Foundation. And a lot of these support groups now are virtual. You don't have to travel anywhere, but you can do these things where they can actually find a community, and shared experience and know you're not alone.
It's really true. That's what we're trying to build here. And having heroes like you come on, and I don't even respond. You are one of my heroes. There are many, many in this community, and we keep having the good fortune of having you on the show. So I really can't thank you enough for being on the show.
Thank you, Barry. You've always been such an amazing friend through my time at the Epilepsy Foundation. I'm fortunate on these podcasts to talk to some of my heroes and Greg. So that's good.
Heroes and Greg.
And Greg.
I love it. Well, I couldn't do this without these two guys. So it's just been so far such a great journey. And Barry, we're going to have you on again. I'm going to rope you in again. I don't mind.
Anytime, my friend.
I don't mind getting 2 invoices from you. File them in the round file cabinet. No problem. But you're the best. And thank you so much. And I'll see you soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Talk About It with Greg Grunberg. Sponsored by Neurelis and by SeizuresAreSigns.com. Thank you to our special guests for joining us, and thank you to J.J. Abrams for the theme music that you're hearing right now. Talk About It is produced by Ken Lowenberg, Greg Grunberg, and Nick Marzak. Editing, directing, and incidental music by Nick Marzak. Go to talkaboutitonvideo.com to watch these episodes, and as always, don't forget to talk about it. This podcast is a production of the Talk About It Company and Motel Podcasts.